Angels do not eat. Spiritual beings do not require sustenance. This is the logic that permeates practically every religious tradition. But in Genesis 18, something inexplicable occurs. 3 celestial visitors sit in the shade of a tree, receive fresh bread, calf meat, and curdled milk from the hands of Abraham, and they eat it all. They chew. They swallow. They partake in a real meal. Why would beings from the spiritual world need to do this? And more importantly, what does this scene reveal about the nature of the encounter between the divine and the human? Before continuing with the video, do you wish to strengthen your prayer life and also help our channel grow? I have prepared a material with more than 50 special prayers to guide you. Click the link in the description and help our project spread the word of Christ. Also, take the opportunity to leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate notifications so as not to miss any messages. And write in the comments from where you are watching. I truly wish to know from which place this word is reaching you. To understand the weight of this narrative, you must first visualize the setting. We are approximately 3,800 years ago in the plains of Mamre, a semi-arid region south of Hebron, in what would today be Palestinian territory. The climate in this area is relentless. During the summer, temperatures easily exceed 40 degrees at noon. The sun punishes the earth with an intensity that forces any sensible person to seek shade and wait for the milder hours of the afternoon to resume activities. Abraham was 99 years old. Sarah, his wife, 89. Together, they carried decades of a promise that seemed increasingly impossible. They would have a son who would give rise to a nation as numerous as the stars in the sky. But time passed, bodies aged, and the promised heir remained only words. On that specific afternoon, Abraham was sitting at the entrance of his tent. This detail is not casual. In the ancient world of the Near East, the tent entrance functioned as an observation post. The patriarch stayed there to watch over his flocks, supervise the servants, and primarily identify travelers on the horizon. Hospitality was one of the most sacred virtues of Semitic culture. Receiving a weary stranger, offering water, food, and rest, was not merely social courtesy. It was a spiritual obligation. Denying shelter to a traveler was equivalent to a grave offense against the codes of honor of the time. And then it happened. Abraham lifted his eyes and saw 3 men standing before him. The original Hebrew text uses the word anashim, which means simply men. There is no description of wings, nor of supernatural radiance, nor of any characteristic that differentiated them from ordinary travelers. They were simply there. 3 masculine figures, apparently human, standing a short distance from the tent. But something in Abraham's reaction indicates that he perceived more than what appeared. The text says he ran to meet them, a man of 99 years, in the scorching heat of midday, running. Then he prostrated himself with his face to the ground. This was not the standard greeting for unknown travelers. It was the reverence reserved for kings, priests, or sacred presences. Consider the urgency of Abraham's words at that moment. He implores that they do not pass by without first resting. He offers water to wash their feet, shade under the tree, and a little bread to restore their strength. But what he actually prepares goes far beyond a little bread. Many people read about the angels who visited Abraham and are impressed by the fact that they ate and drank like ordinary men. But they almost never stop to reflect on what that visit truly reveals about the presence of God, spiritual discernment, and promises that seem impossible. The Bible is full of moments like this, where the supernatural touches the natural in a profound and transformative way. And understanding these encounters helps us to view faith with more maturity. If you desire to deepen your walk even further and comprehend the most impactful words of Christ, I have prepared the digital book, The 7 Last Words of Jesus That Shook Jerusalem. In it, you will understand the context of each declaration and how to apply these teachings to your life. In the description, I have left the book for those who wish to continue this journey today. Abraham enters the tent and asks Sarah to quickly prepare 3 measures of fine flour. 3 measures are equivalent to approximately 22 liters of flour. This would yield enough bread to feed an entire family for several days. It was not a modest portion, it was a banquet. While Sarah worked on the dough, Abraham ran to the herd and personally chose a young and fat calf. This choice also carries weight. A young and well-fed calf was one of a shepherd's most valuable assets. It represented investment, future wealth, and the reproductive potential of the flock. Sacrificing such an animal for strangers was a gesture of extreme generosity. The calf was delivered to a servant, who prepared it quickly. The text does not detail the exact time, but the process of slaughtering, cleaning, and cooking an entire calf would take at least 2 to 3 hours, even with help. During this entire period, the 3 visitors waited in the shade of the oak, while the meal was prepared with meticulous care. When everything was ready, Abraham personally brought the dishes: fresh curds, milk, the tender meat of the calf, and the bread recently baked by Sarah. He did not sit with them. He stood by their side, serving while they ate. This posture reinforces the reverence. Abraham assumed the role of a servant before the visitors, demonstrating maximum honor. And here we reach the point that has intrigued theologians for millennia. They ate. The Hebrew text uses the verb vayochelu, and they ate. It is not a metaphor. It is not symbolic language. The narrative clearly states that the 3 visitors consumed the meal prepared by Abraham. They chewed the bread. They drank the milk. They ate the meat. They participated in a physical, corporeal human act. How is this possible if at least one of them was God himself? The answer is not simple, and different traditions offer varied interpretations. In the classical Jewish reading, especially in the rabbinic commentaries of the Talmud and the Midrash, the 3 visitors are identified as angels sent with specific missions. The first would have come to announce the birth of Isaac, the second to inform about the imminent judgment of Sodom and Gomorrah, the third to execute the rescue of Lot and his family before the destruction. This division of functions appears more clearly as the narrative progresses. In chapter 19, only 2 angels arrive at Sodom, while the third remains conversing with Abraham. This third is explicitly identified in the text as the Lord, using the sacred tetragrammaton YHWH. This suggests that the divine presence was there directly, not merely represented by messengers. But then another problem arises. If one of the 3 was God himself, and God is spirit, how could he eat physical food? Some traditions respond that the angels did not truly eat, but only appeared to eat out of courtesy, making the food disappear in some supernatural way. This interpretation attempts to preserve the incorporeal nature of celestial beings. However, it weakens the force of the original text, which gives no indication of simulation. Other interpretations, especially in the early Christian tradition, saw in this scene a theophany, a temporary physical manifestation of God in human form. In this reading, the divine genuinely assumed corporeal characteristics for a limited period, including the capacity to ingest food. This would not diminish his divine nature, but would demonstrate his capacity to enter fully into the human experience when necessary. There is yet a third perspective, more symbolic. The act of eating together in the ancient world was not just nutrition, it was a covenant. It was a commitment. It was the establishment of a bond. By accepting Abraham's meal, the visitors were sealing a relationship. They were honoring the host. They were preparing the emotional and spiritual ground for the revelation that would follow. And what a revelation! During the meal or shortly after, one of the visitors asked the question that would change everything. "Where is Sarah, your wife?" Abraham replied that she was in the tent. Then came the announcement, "I will certainly return to you at this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son." Think of the impact of these words. Sarah was 89 years old. She had passed menopause decades ago. Biologically, pregnancy was impossible. Her own body had ended the reproductive cycle many years before. And now a stranger sitting in the shade of a tree, eating the bread she herself had prepared, affirmed with absolute certainty that in 12 months she would be holding a baby in her arms. Sarah heard from inside the tent, and she laughed. It was not a laugh of joy. It was a laugh of bitter disbelief, the laugh of one who has already given up, the laugh of one who has heard the same promise so many times that it lost any power to generate hope. The text even records her thought. "After I am waxed old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also?" The visitor's response was direct and cutting. Wherefore did Sarah laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord? This question traverses the centuries. It was not only for Sarah, it was for every future reader who doubted divine promises. It was for you. Is there anything impossible for God? Is there a limit to what he can do? Sarah, frightened, denied having laughed, but the visitor insisted, "Nay, but thou didst laugh." He knew. He saw through the walls of the tent. He knew the thoughts she had not even verbalized. This detail confirms that this was no ordinary traveler. It was someone with supernatural perception. After the meal and the announcement, the visitors rose and looked towards Sodom. The city was approximately 40 kilometers away, visible on the horizon of the valley. Abraham accompanied them for part of the way, as was the custom of a good host. And then something extraordinary happened. The Lord decided to reveal to Abraham what he was about to do. He would not hide his plans from the man he had chosen to be the father of a great nation. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah was determined. The cry against these cities had risen to the heavens. Their sins were too grave to be ignored. 2 of the visitors proceeded towards Sodom, but one remained, and the text identifies this one clearly. It was the Lord, YHWH, the God of Abraham. There, standing in human form, conversing as one friend converses with another. What follows is one of the most daring dialogues in the entire Bible. Abraham approached and questioned, "Wilt thou also destroy the righteous with the wicked?" He did not passively accept the announcement of judgment. He argued, he negotiated, he interceded. "Peradventure there be 50 righteous within the city. Wilt thou also destroy and not spare the place for the 50 righteous that are therein? That be far from thee to do after this manner, to slay the righteous with the wicked, and that the righteous should be as the wicked that be far from thee. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right?" Observe the courage of this question. Abraham was questioning the justice of God. He was placing a moral standard before the Creator and asking if he would fulfill it. This was not arrogance. It was intimacy. It was the kind of conversation that only happens between people who have a genuine relationship. The answer came immediately. "If I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare all the place for their sakes." But Abraham did not stop. He continued negotiating, always with humility, but also with impressive persistence. "Behold now, I have taken upon me to speak unto the Lord, which am but dust and ashes. Peradventure there shall lack 5 of the 50 righteous. Wilt thou destroy all the city for lack of 5? 45, 40, 30, 20, 10. 6 times Abraham reduced the number. 6 times the Lord agreed to spare the city if that quantity of righteous were found. The negotiation stopped at 10. Abraham did not ask for less, perhaps because 10 was the minimum number to form a congregation in later Jewish tradition, perhaps because he assumed that at least 10 righteous people would exist in an entire city, perhaps because he felt he had already tested the limits of divine patience. But there were not 10 righteous in Sodom. When the 2 angels arrived at the city that same night, they found a reality even worse than the cry indicated. Lot, Abraham's nephew, was sitting at the gate of the city when he saw them. Like his uncle, he recognized something special in the visitors and insisted that they stay at his house instead of spending the night in the square. The angels accepted. Lot prepared a meal for them, including unleavened bread. Again, celestial beings participating in human food. The pattern repeats. But before they could sleep, the house was surrounded. Men from all over the city, young and old, from every quarter, came to demand that Lot surrender the visitors so they could violate them. The text is explicit. The entire male population of the city participated. There was no exception. There were not 10 righteous. The angels pulled Lot inside and struck the multitude with blindness. Even so, the men continued trying to find the door, groping in the dark, unable to give up their perverse intention. The next morning, the angels literally dragged Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters out of the city. The order was clear. Flee to the mountains, do not look back, do not stop anywhere in the plain. Destruction was coming. Then the Lord rained brimstone and fire upon Sodom and Gomorrah. The Hebrew text describes a rain of destruction coming from the heavens. The entire plain was consumed. The cities disappeared. The vegetation was annihilated. The soil became sterile. Modern archaeologists and geologists have proposed various theories to explain this destruction. Some suggest a seismic event combined with the eruption of subterranean gases. The Dead Sea region is geologically unstable, situated over the Rift Valley Fault. Deposits of bitumen and sulfur exist naturally in the area. A combination of earthquake, release of flammable gases, and ignition could produce the type of devastation described in the text. Other researchers proposed a meteor impact or asteroid fragment. In 2021, a study published in the journal Scientific Reports analyzed evidence at Tel El Hammam, an archaeological site in Jordan that some identify as ancient Sodom. The researchers found signs of sudden destruction by extreme heat approximately 3,600 years ago. Melted pottery, vitrified bricks, instantly collapsed structures. The pattern would be consistent with an aerial explosion of a cosmic object, similar to the Tunguska event in Siberia in 1908. Regardless of the natural mechanism involved, the biblical text emphasizes the moral cause. The destruction was not a geological accident. It was divine judgment against a society that had completely corrupted its values. Lot's wife looked back. Despite the express order, despite the clear warning, she turned her face to see the city being destroyed. Perhaps out of longing, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of attachment to what she was losing, and she turned into a pillar of salt. This image remained engraved in the collective memory. To this day, saline formations in the Dead Sea region are popularly associated with this story. One of them, known as Lot's wife's pillar, attracts tourists seeking to connect the landscape with the biblical narrative. When Abraham woke the next morning and looked from the heights toward the plain where the cities were, he saw only smoke rising from the earth, like the smoke of a furnace. The cities had disappeared. The judgment was complete. But within this destruction there was also mercy. Lot was saved, his daughters were saved, not by their own merit, but because of Abraham. The text is explicit, and it came to pass, when God destroyed the cities of the plain, that God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow. The patriarch's intercession did not save Sodom, but it saved his nephew. And what of the promise made during the meal? Exactly 1 year later, Sarah gave birth to a son. At 90 years of age, after an entire life of sterility, she held the promised baby in her arms. The name chosen was Isaac, which means laughter. The same laugh of disbelief she had given in the tent was transformed into the name of the miracle performed. The impossible happened. The woman who laughed at the promise now laughed with joy. God hath made me to laugh, she declared. All that hear will laugh with me. Irony redeemed, doubt transformed into celebration. But why did this entire story begin with a meal? Why does the text insist on detailing the ingredients, the preparation, the service, the act of eating? Why would celestial visitors need to participate in something as mundane as a meal before delivering such extraordinary messages? Perhaps because the sacred was never separated from the everyday in the Hebrew worldview. God does not dwell only in temples and special moments. He appears at the tent entrance, in the heat of midday, accepts bread from the hands of an elderly man, and sits to eat before changing the destiny of families and nations. The meal establishes communion. It creates a bond. It demonstrates mutual trust. In the ancient East, sharing food with someone was to seal an implicit covenant of protection and respect. By eating what Abraham offered, the visitors were saying, "We accept your hospitality, we recognize your honor, we establish a relationship with you." And it was within this relationship that the promise gained weight. God did not send a night vision. He did not speak through enigmatic dreams. He did not thunder from the heavens with a terrifying voice. He came in human form, sat in the shade, accepted food, and conversed as a friend converses. Revelation was born of intimacy. This pattern appears repeatedly in the scriptures. When God established the covenant with Israel at Sinai, Moses, Aaron, and the 70 elders went up the mountain, saw God, and ate and drank in his presence. The covenant was sealed with a meal. Passover, the central celebration of Judaism, is fundamentally a ritual meal. The roasted lamb, the bitter herbs, the unleavened bread, Everything revolves around eating together while remembering liberation. And when Jesus wished to leave a memorial of his redemptive work on the eve of the crucifixion, what did he do? He prepared a meal. "This is my body, which is given for you. This do in remembrance of me." The bread broken, the wine served, the covenant sealed again around a table. The scene at Abraham's tent is not just an isolated episode. It is the establishment of a pattern that traverses the entire history of redemption. The sacred enters the world through the common. The divine reveals itself in the everyday. And the meal table becomes an altar of encounter. Centuries later, on a dusty road near Emmaus, two disciples walked desolately after the crucifixion of Jesus. A stranger joined them, and they conversed for hours. He explained the scriptures, showed how everything pointed to the Messiah, but they did not recognize him. Their eyes were hindered. Only when they reached the village and sat down to eat, when the bread was broken and blessed, did they recognize who was there, the risen Christ, and then he disappeared. The pattern is the same. The divine arrives disguised, walks alongside, sits at the table, and only in the act of the shared meal reveals its identity. Abraham served bread and meat to unknown visitors and discovered he was hosting God himself. The disciples offered a place at the table to a stranger and found the living Savior. Perhaps the lesson traverses the millennia. The sacred rarely arrives with prior announcement. It appears in the form of a weary traveler, of an unexpected request, of an interruption in the routine. Sometimes it wears the dusty clothes of a walker. Sometimes it asks for a glass of water. Sometimes it simply emerges on the horizon on a hot afternoon when you expected no one. The letter to the Hebrews seems to echo this story directly when it instructs, "Be not forgetful to entertain strangers, for thereby some have entertained angels unawares." The reference to Abraham is evident, and the application is direct. You do not know who is behind that person who needs welcoming. It may be just a traveler. It may be much more. The three visitors of Mamre came with news that seemed impossible. A son for a sterile woman of 90 years, judgment for entire cities, salvation for a righteous man and his family. And everything was communicated around a table between bread, meat, and milk, while the sun descended on the horizon. The question that remains is not whether God still visits. The question is whether you would recognize the visit. To help us continue producing these documentaries and biblical stories, consider acquiring our ebook with more than 50 prayers. It is a way to bless this project and, at the same time, have a spiritual guide for your walk. The link to secure yours is in the description. Until the next video.